Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for CCSSO's Inclusive Leadership Webisode series. My name is Crystal Eldridge and I'm a Program Associate of Student Expectations at CCSSO. Today, we will be learning from schools where everyone belongs with Washington State's Inclusionary Practices demonstration sites. Joining us today, we have Dr. Cassie Martin. Dr. Cassie Martin is the founder of the IPP Demonstration Sites Project and the current Executive Director of Special Education in Washington State at the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. For over 25 years, Cassie has dedicated her professional life and learning to equitable and inclusive education for students with disabilities in support of strong educational outcomes for all students across the educational system. Cassie has demonstrated great capacity to build and sustain coalitions across the state based on trust and accountability, leveraging strengths, and by consistently delivering positive outcomes. We are also joined by Dr. Rena Marie Leon Guerrero. Rena Marie is the demonstration site project lead. Her background is in special education and applied behavior analysis, and she has held many roles from classroom teacher, therapist, and educational coach. It has been a highlight of her work to be part of increasing inclusionary and equitable practices for all and transforming the educational system in Washington State. Last but definitely not least, we're joined by Kathy Davis. Kathy Davis is the founding principal of Ruby Bridges Elementary, a fully inclusive elementary school in Washington State. She's a passionate advocate of inclusive education, an experienced K-8 teacher, reading specialist, and instructional leader. Kathy's areas of leadership, interest, and expertise center on inclusive education as well as systems and organizational change grounded in belonging and educational justice, transforming schools and our educational system for students and families through the work at Ruby Bridges Elementary, and as a demonstration site lead is the highlight of her leadership journey thus far. Really quickly, we're going to review our tech norms. Everyone should be logged into the Zoom system. Feel free to turn your camera on. We love seeing everyone's faces, but please mute yourself. If you would, go ahead and share your name, role, and organization in the chat pod. Also, you may ask questions via chat pod at any time, but we will have 2 dedicated question and answer sessions. So if you have a question that you think of and you want to just get it out there, go ahead and put it in the chat pod and we'll address it at one of those specific times. Briefly, this is our agenda for today. We'll do the introduction and framing. Then we will see an overview of IPP and impetus for the creation of IPP Demo Sites Project with Dr. Martin and Dr. Guerrero. And then look into the opening of Ruby Bridges as an inclusive school with Kathy Davis. Then we'll have our first Q&A, and then we'll look at some data and takeaways. And then we'll have our final Q&A. I want to provide some brief context around our Inclusive Leadership Webisode series. In 2018, we at CCSSO partnered with the Cedar Center and the Oak Foundation, along with the National Collaborative on Inclusive Principal Leadership, to develop an online resource for states supporting inclusive schools for the success of each child, a guide for states on principal leadership. This webisode series builds on that foundational guide to show resources, foundational practices, and strategies for promoting inclusive and equitable leadership. The guide contains 9 strategies for states to bolster support for aspiring and practicing leaders to lead effective and inclusive schools. I want to highlight one strategy that aligns with today's topic. So today, we're highlighting strategy 5, provided targeted supports to districts and schools, promote coherence among various programs and policies by encouraging districts to incorporate inclusive principal leadership into existing programs and strands of work, provide direct services and resources to districts and schools around effective inclusive principal leadership and devote resources to increase local capacity to do the same, and identify schools and/or districts that model successful inclusive leadership practice and identify which of the actions that have garnered success could be replicated and scaled. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to our presenters today.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Hi, everyone. I'm Cassie, and I will start by setting the stage for us this morning. So in 2018, Washington State was one of the 10 least inclusive states for students with disabilities in the country. By creating a statewide cross-organizational priority to address this critical issue, Washington State focused on changing this trajectory. A professional development network, which we call the Inclusionary Practices Cadre, was created to build statewide capacity to support students with disabilities being educated in inclusive educational environments. The positive impacts of these efforts quickly became evident through significant improvement of statewide least restrictive environment data. To supplement the ongoing professional development in support of inclusionary practices being offered through the Inclusionary Practices Cadre, Washington State partners collaborated to specifically address these emerging needs through the IPP across the state's 16 inclusionary practices demonstration sites. So this morning or afternoon, based on where you are in the country, we'll share more about these demonstration sites, and we are extraordinarily fortunate to have one of those with us today, Kathy Davis from Ruby Bridges Elementary. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. So again, just starting with a little bit of the background information about the IPP Demonstration Sites project. It was in the fall of 2019. The Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction in Washington State launched the Inclusionary Practices Professional Development Project. You can see the code and link for more information on the IPP, but as part of the Inclusionary Practices Project, the University of Washington Herring Center partnered with OSPI to coordinate and lead this part of the larger statewide project, which was creating demonstration sites that highlight inclusionary practices across Washington State. The Demonstration Sites project was really developed to provide educators and families and community organizations from around the state with the opportunity to observe inclusionary practices in action, meet with school teams, collect artifacts that aid in systems change, and learn about how to implement inclusionary practices in different school contexts. So in collaboration with Herring Center inclusion specialists, these demonstration site schools host visiting schools to showcase high leverage inclusionary practices. And by sharing these practices and opening their doors to teachers, administrators, families, and community members, it allows visitors to see best practices in action and apply them back in their own school contexts. At the same time, the demonstration sites themselves continue to grow their inclusive cultures and refine their practices that contribute to equitable learning for all students as part of hosting those visits and in partnership with the Inclusionary Practices Project. So our demonstration sites represent the diversity of Washington State, with some of our largest and smallest schools and districts and schools. They go across rural and urban districts. And one of the things that makes our project so interesting is that our demonstration sites are sharing information and strategies with colleagues around the state. In addition to one another, in efforts to improve and grow their own inclusionary practices and a culture of inclusion statewide. So again, as I've mentioned a few times here, they're not only impacting visiting schools, and you'll hear some of this from Kathy today, but they're creating their own professional networks that make our demonstration sites even stronger. We can go to the next slide. There are some founding principles that drive our demonstration sites work. To start, in every school, there are things that are working well. We really use that appreciative inquiry approach to the work that we do. And taking this asset-based approach, we find is a productive way for schools to leverage their strengths to become more inclusive. We also do not approach special education as a special education initiative or inclusion as a special education initiative, but it involves that cultural shift in philosophy and practice across our entire educational system. So we need to consider the culture of the entire school community and really examine our beliefs about the value of all students in order to truly impact student learning and foster inclusive cultures in our schools. And we believe that all members of the school community, district, and supporting entities have a role in creating and sustaining inclusive schools. We also know that there are specific strategies and practices we can use to share our journey that are more likely to impact change, both in our own buildings, but also across our districts and visiting schools. This has both to do with how we capture what we've done, but also how we disseminate that information in a way that impacts change. It includes how we tell our stories to provide that transformational learning experience to visiting schools. Our demonstration sites provide that transformational professional development by highlighting collaborative cultures, distributive leadership, and partner engagement, and have innovative site-based leadership, which aligns with what we know the research says is necessary for inclusive schools to thrive.
Thanks, Cassie. So as Cassie shared the founding principles, now we'll go into what those goals look like. So in order to effectively share information leading to transformation, we always want to go back to the foundational why. And we continuously circle back to the why. Why is this work important? What was the need? And when demonstration sites tell their story, it always circles back and is grounded in their why. Why this is important in the first place? What systematic problems are we addressing? Why is what we are doing so critical to the current landscapes of public schooling? I know none of us would have difficulty answering those questions, but we need to also consider how we engage others in their journey on their own why. And when we continuously grounded in the why, moves our stories forward, and the whys might be different from what they were 3 years ago or 1 year ago, but sharing that process is how it's shifting and changing is valuable. Continue with our goals here. Our goals for the demonstration sites are both simple and complex. We want to make sure that when school and district personnel and teams visit demonstration sites or hear about their journeys, that they are provided with a transformational learning experience, seeing inclusionary practices in action, and leave with ideas for implementation in their own school. Additionally, our third goal is to create peer learning communities between demonstration sites in order to build professional networks in our state. We aren't only impacting visiting schools, but we are working with demonstration sites to continue to evolve and change. Because one of our founding principles is that inclusion is a cultural shift in philosophy and practice. Demonstration sites show that when we shift our mindsets and put best practices in place for students with disabilities and consider how we are implementing these practices in general education context and in content, it improves outcomes for all students in school. And we'll share a little bit later our professional network data. Other important goals for this project are to improve the social and academic outcomes for students with and without disabilities, as well as to show that when we do things that are better for students, it is typically better for adults too. As we share some of what our demonstration sites are doing to innovate and sharing some of the challenges, our visitors leave with some key takeaways to bring with them back to their own school teams and districts. This includes information, tools, and supports schools and districts can use to build, implement, and sustain an inclusive school. We can share more about the demonstration site project, but as we mentioned, stories of what's happening are most impactful, and seeing and hearing from our demonstration sites is really what creates that transformational professional learning experience we are looking for. This is why I'm so pleased to introduce you today to our very innovative and inspiring colleague, principal at Ruby Bridges Elementary in the North Shore School District, Kathy Davis. You can see on this slide some of Ruby Bridges' priorities and actions that have contributed to creating a school where everyone belongs. And now I'd like to pass it on to Kathy.
Thanks, Rena Marie. It's such a pleasure to be here today. Today, I'm going to begin by starting with just some background about our wonderful school. It's a pretty special and magical place, which has been such a highlight to be a part of the demonstration site project and have so many visitors from around the nation come to our school. So first of all, we opened Ruby Bridges Elementary in September 2020. So we are a very new school community after a year of planning and design, which did include some direct partnership with Dr. Martin in the visioning process as the founding principal of the school. As the planning and design was definitely impacted due to the pandemic, I'm really proud and in retrospect, thinking about how my team surmounted the pandemic to open a brand new school, first in a virtual learning atmosphere, and then most recently into in-person school last year. In the design work prior to opening, the engagement of mission and vision was really central in our work together. The Ruby Bridges mission and vision, which you can see in ruby red on the screen and on this slide right here intentionally centers around the components of learning, leadership, and belonging. When we are thinking about our vision, it's in alignment with the representation of our school's namesake, Ruby Bridges, who first took steps as an elementary school student to integrate schools. In many ways, our staff routinely talks about the fact that our work at Ruby Bridges Elementary is really a continuation of the bold walk that Ruby Bridges herself took 62 years ago. We're continuing to disrupt segregation and siloed practices in education, very much like Ruby first did in that walk so many years ago. Our focus at Ruby Bridges is first to ensure that each student and family feels that we thought of them when we made the space. Through this planning and design process, as well as now 2 years into our open school project, each decision and each inclusionary practice that we implement is really about centralizing belonging and proactively placing the tools, supports, and building elements needed for diverse learners everywhere within our learning space. Our team at Ruby Bridges joined the staff with the understanding and the mutual agreement that we were going to rethink educational experiences and professional collaboration, and that we would be dismantling spaces of othering that exist in our schools. For example, in self-contained learning spaces or spaces that might be actively just for certain students and only those students throughout the educational system. We wanted to dismantle the ableist mindset entirely. We got rid of the boxes altogether rather than just thinking outside of the box. Within our school, you will find no spaces of self-contained or dedicated pull-out instruction for any student group. Throughout the building, you will find a lot of flexible spaces, hallways, varying sizes and configurations of spaces that make sense for the students who need them, where learning and teaching happens, or where all students have the actual ability to access the tools that they need for breaks, for learning, for regulation, and just for fun. The vision for an inclusive and engaging learning experience is really what drives all of our decisions and all of my decisions in particular as a building leader. As we are working to cultivate our community of belonging, the inclusive practices that we are utilizing, the inclusive practices that our visitors come to see in demo site visits are really the vehicle and foundation for how we bring this vision to life. At the core of our inclusionary practices work is an inherent belief in the competence and the potential of each and every learner within our building to be successful and to contribute as a member of the school community. Our team has been organizing itself around this value, as well as this mutual agreement that we have about our work being collective and not individual. And in essence, that's really the work of demonstration sites as well. Central to my leadership work in this inclusive community is assessing and considering what levers I can pull, what levers I can support in instructional practice, in systems transformation and structures, so we can pull that vision off the page. So laying the groundwork and thinking about our core values and beliefs, on this slide, you can see two students that are working together to use an iPad with Proloquo to Go, one of our visual grids for communication. As I share some of the core components of inclusionary practices at Ruby Bridges, I would like to first center us with a quote from the text Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity by Floyd Cobb and John Crownapple, which is the central text that our building staff is using in our professional learning. Inclusion is engagement within a community where the equal worth and inherent dignity of each person is honored. An inclusive community promotes and sustains a sense of belonging. It affirms the talents, beliefs, backgrounds, and ways of living of its members. This is the core definition that our team is using when we're thinking about inclusion. It is much more and well beyond anything that is a special education initiative. The transformation of culture and systems and all of the facets of teaching and learning at Ruby Bridges are really centered on the context of moving beyond acceptance and acknowledgement, which is we're all in this space together, to affirmation and co-creation and a sustained experience of belonging for each member of our learning community. Our vision of belonging is centering us actively on how we communicate our values, how we create spaces for the unique contribution of our learners. And while our individual skills and talents to support learners are important, we're also emphasizing this idea that our team's collective skills and collaboration is really what is going to ensure that each student is given the supports to be successful. We talk a lot about that in our demonstration site visits, and I think it's one of the most powerful pieces of the journey that we're going through right now at our school. We're taking mutual responsibility for the work that's happening because we believe that each student is our student and we're not labeling our students or the work with them. This slide also depicts a wonderful example of how inclusionary supports proactively support all of our students and begin to unlock the skills and connection opportunities that exist in inclusive school spaces. Throughout our school building journey, we have implemented the use of symbols aligned with our students' AAC devices as we seek to implement Tier 1 whole school supports that make sense for all of our learners. We have recognized the importance of communication tools and the relationship building that happens when students can communicate with each other. So we've created and installed tools throughout the campus, including core language boards that match up with our students' AAC devices, as well as training and support for our students and staff around how these devices and these symbols work to enhance communication across all spheres within the school community. In the process of utilizing this use of symbols, our students have since developed a deeper understanding of the many ways that communication can look and how to best support each other as they engage with friends. Iterations of these language boards, the use of iPads and symbols in our classrooms, and learning in partnership has become a norm for students in places all over campus. Our students who do not have specific expressive needs have asked us for more support to refine their own use of symbols and inclusionary devices, such as our AAC devices or our visuals that we're using in classrooms, to learn how to engage with each other. We can see that our work to hold space, originally when we designed this building, holding space for inclusive community, has now become a story of co-creation of inclusive community by the members of our student body, which is really exciting. A common theme in leadership conversations with staff, as well as our demonstration site visitors, is really emphasizing that there is no neutral action in our work to ensure each student experiences a robust and inclusive, belonging-centered education. We're either on our purpose or we're off of it, and it's ongoing work. Every structure and system at Ruby Bridges is a manifestation of our school vision. A building master schedule with all of the implications within it really cannot be underestimated. If we say that our vision is each student learning, leading, and experiencing belonging, then we need to be asking the hard questions about whether this is the message that our schedules and structures tell. The starting point for our work in scheduling is considering our students furthest from educational justice to help focus that work. We want the story that we're telling our students to be completely aligned in the actions that we are putting forth in our building. We start with our students at the center, centering that conversation on the high leverage practices and the specificity of student strengths, assets, and challenges. We know that our student population is going to change year to year, and that each year our priority has to be, how do we deliver the quality of instruction that we need to deliver for each student and reduce the barriers for students proactively? Using flexible service delivery models, our staff has structured and organized their schedules based on student needs, professional expertise, and the knowledge that as we continue to build capacity, our structures and our components of that schedule might adjust and change year to year. We also want to eliminate barriers in our planning process and in that preparation with general education teachers in the setting and beyond, and in that co-planning process where our support services staff is uniquely positioned to be able to support universal design for learning in our classrooms during core content. In thinking about the elements of our master schedule blocks, we emphasize creating cohesive time periods for instruction, protected intervention and acceleration blocks, and being really strategic to avoid elevated needs for personnel in multiple places around our building at the same time. This is the work of leadership and planning that sets the team up for success in instruction across the day. It's also crucial for us to have the common understanding that we have norms and practices around intervention blocks and acceleration so that we maintain those practices and our collaboration can be brought to life in our work with students. When any of these pieces is poorly defined in any one of our school systems, what we find is that our inclusionary work is then impacted. With each year, our purpose has remained the same, but what we are learning is that we need to adapt and adjust to student needs, as well as the collective efficacy that our teaching cohort is growing every single year. We know that we're on a pathway to continuous improvement and not a destination. We are reflecting, we're adjusting, and we're acting again. And I often talk with my staff as well as our demo site visitors about how they are coming to visit the messy middle, which can only be found when you begin, which is super important. You can't be in the middle if you never get started. But also that as a demonstration site, we're inviting our colleagues and partners to engage with us because we're teaching and learning and they're teaching and learning in that process. There's this exciting energy that happens in those demonstration site visits, which is collaborative energy, but it's also that synergy of spirit that I find that I experience every time someone comes to our school. It results when people come together from many places with a shared commitment to be in it and cultivate educational justice in our school communities.
Thank you so much. Really quickly, if we have any questions before we move on to the next portion. What was the name of the book Miss Davis mentioned?
I just put it in the chat, Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity by Cobb and Crownapple. It's a fantastic book.
Thank you. Okay, well, if we don't have anything else, I'm going to say we can go on to the next portion of the presentation.
Okay, so great. Now what we're going to kind of focus on is, what we've learned so far. As Kathy says, we are on this ongoing journey. This is not a destination. So we're always responsive and thinking about what we've learned throughout this entire process, and we continue on this path of growth and learning. So what we're going to do is we're going to share some of the outcomes and data that we've collected thus far around our professional networks, the state least restrictive environment data, and Ruby Bridges outcomes and measures. To start and in alignment with our project goals, we really work to engage our professional learning communities in strength-based planning. We talked about that as one of our kind of founding principles at the very beginning. So in order to build bold strategies for inclusion, we wanted for schools and districts and communities to recognize successes as a way to build the confidence in the community. The energy and emotions associated with identifying and celebrating and building on strengths enables people to transform systems, and it gets them moving in new directions, not just different directions, new directions. So through this work, we recognize that when educators and leadership start by rooting their conversations in what's working and building a culture of presuming competence, and you heard Kathy talk about that earlier, that the safety required for that innovation, risk-taking, and learning grows. People become more open, more forthcoming, more confident, and that leads to greater change, that collective efficacy, and in result, more inclusive schools. In addition, we believe, and you heard Kathy talk about this, the impact that the visitors have on her, that everyone is learning together. We believe in the power of professional networking, and we know that engagement in diverse educational professional learning communities increases the social network and allows schools and communities to reflect on and innovate to make schools more inclusive. And this facilitates that systems change, which is why we encourage both our demonstration sites to learn from one another and schedule school visits where teams from different districts can come together to share strengths and challenges and to build those professional networks, contributing to a more sustainable culture and become more involved in inclusive education. So, through our work together, through the partnership with the University of Washington, what we're really trying to do in the future is take that step back, continue to maybe offer some support and technical assistance and be thought partners, but to really let our districts and schools lead in this work.
Thanks. As Cassie shared about those professional networks, we wanted to share some of that data and what that looks like here. Because of the power of the professional networks, over the course of the project, we have collected and how these relationships are building in an effort to continue to facilitate that systems change. And these professional networks provide us with another measurement to determine the reach of our demonstration sites across Washington State. For example, schools that adopt and implement what they learn from our IPP demonstration sites in their own school context. Social network analysis allows us to identify the connection that demonstration sites have within their own professional networks. So to provide a brief explanation of the data above, we surveyed demonstration sites in the fall of 2020 to collect baseline, and you'll see that's what you see on the left, and then on the right, that data in spring of 2021. So we asked the following questions. With whom have you shared materials, resources, artifacts, or information about inclusionary practices? And the visual representation of our baseline there on the left shows a social network analysis. Not many schools, right, as we would anticipate when we're entering this work, had strong connections to other schools and other districts. But we see by spring of 2021, all of those connections that have been established between the sites, and then as well as other schools that are presented in the red are non-demonstration sites. So the reach goes outside the project. And so our professional network analysis shows us that even in a pandemic year of physical quarantining and virtual learning, an educational community can connect and collaborate in a way that centers inclusion and educator learning.
Thanks, Rena Marie. And I want to kind of quickly mention also that as part of the inclusionary practices cadre that I mentioned at the very beginning, we have the opportunity to model this as well. One of the architects of the larger inclusionary practices project, Dr. Tanya May, our Assistant Superintendent for Special Education, who's on this call, she really intentionally developed with her colleagues, this is before I was at OSPI, this network of technical assistance providers, of professional development providers. And over time, what we've had the opportunity to do is learn from one another as well. So we are working together again to make our impact stronger as we learn more about kind of what the needs are in our state as we can impact change. So we're able to model that behavior as an inclusionary practices cadre, along with seeing this happen across our state, across schools, and within the inclusionary practices demonstration site project, which is really exciting. So, as Rena Marie mentioned, we're looking at our reach even during pandemic times. And in the spring of 2021, each of our demonstration sites hosted a series of webinars because we couldn't go visit schools in person at that time to provide a virtual visit and a deep dive into their highlighted inclusionary practices. And we started to collect data about where people were participating from. And so on the left, you'll see, which educational service district regions people were joining from. And you can see it really all over the state. And then on the right, the map shows percentages of school districts represented across the educational service districts. So this map really depicts the percentage of school districts in each ESD that participated in the IPP demonstration site webinars hosted in the spring of 2020. And the following ESDs had more than 1/3 of their school district represented. We had ESD 121, 105, 114, 123, 171, and 189 joining us, which was really exciting.
Thanks, Cassie. And when visitors come, right, we're all on this path of continuous growth, and we ask for feedback because we want to improve the visit experience for others and give that feedback to our demonstration sites too. And so when visitors are asked to provide this feedback, and above you can see on the top left there in that pie chart that the yellow shows that over 30% of visitors point to the observation of school-wide inclusion as a takeaway, and a quarter share that their biggest takeaway is just how inspiring the visits were. And so this affirms the goal of the project to provide that transformational change through visiting schools. I mean, it's wonderful to get to listen to Kathy and share this amazing journey, but wow, it's just such an awe-inspiring feeling to be in that building and to walk around and see it in action and get to talk to educators and others there. So we really want that transformational experience too. And then on the right, we asked visitors just to kind of rate how valuable did you find this visit, and most on a scale of 1 to 6 there, and most show that it was very, very valuable. But all our feedback has been that the visits have been valuable. And oftentimes too, when they come there, visiting sites or districts may be joining other sites coming together. And so they are building another professional network in that capacity as well. And oftentimes it's all about relationships, and we, as Cassie shared, we are kind of helping them build those relationships and bridge that gap too, and know where inclusive practices that they're interested in, we can help make those connections and they can take it from there. I'll hand it back to Cassie.
Thanks, Rita Marie. And again, just quickly, I mentioned where Washington State was positioned back in 2018. And above, you can see the least restrictive environment data showing that 2018 baseline and the 2021 data and the percentage of change between those 3 years with the implementation of OSPI's Inclusionary Practices project. Notable are the shifts in LRE 1 and LRE 2. And then we have LRE 3, which often includes students with more significant support needs. And that's an area of continued focus. And this information has helped us as we're working to ensure that when we're talking about each and every student, we actually mean each and every student. And this is one of the reasons why Ruby Bridges is such a great example of this. And Kathy's going to share some of her data now with the group.
Thanks, Cassie. Our learners have experienced a really powerful model of inclusive supports, and we're seeing real academic outcomes evidence to support our theory of action that students receiving consistent, universally designed instruction in the core, paired with flexible service delivery, intervention, and accelerations, and heterogeneous groupings that are really designed to meet their needs for the next just right skill in their learning pathway is the way to go. In our ELA and math content areas in particular, I'm just going to briefly share a little bit of data that really tells a little bit more of that story. So our students really showed, as you can see in this reading growth visual here, a lot of progress toward being at or beyond standard. If you look at the far right of the screen, you can see our diagnostic data for the fall in reading and how some of that data in terms of our literacy domains can be visualized on the far left. So we had a pretty rapid level of growth for students. I really appreciate the bottom part of this particular visual because it shows us not only that we are having students who are moving closer to meeting reading standards, but we're also seeing a consistent growth pattern of students who are meeting standard when they come into a particular grade level, moving toward well above standard, which is really, I think, part of the strength of the inclusionary practices model is that we are working to support the needs of each and every learner, not just some learners and not just in certain ways, but across the spectrum of our learners, because we know all of our learners have assets and strengths and all of our learners have needs for intervention and acceleration in some manner. You can go on to the next slide. So we saw parity in terms of our math outcomes. As this slide shows, the overall academic gains in math, like reading, were really significant. And we have been working to disaggregate our data to take a deeper look at the trajectory of progress for students who are furthest from educational justice. And what we're seeing there is really pointing toward our students making progress at a trajectory that is leading them toward meeting standard, which was definitely the goal. But it's also helping to paint the picture of how certain aspects of inclusionary practices and delivery of intervention and acceleration or delivery of core instruction paired with specially designed instruction is coming off the page. So we're encouraged when we look at these data sets that show us some of that domain information about our learners in reading and math and really see a deep connectedness to that consistency of types of instruction or types of intervention that we've been providing in reading and math, which is really something that we can do in this model in a different way than what schools who are really put in a position where they're trying to divide with interventionist time across an inconsistent or incoherent schedule. And that tends to be more of a, it feels a little bit like a fire extinguisher approach in terms of trying to meet needs rather than a cohesive, coherent system of support for all students. So on the next slide, I think is a great opportunity to just look a little bit at that disaggregated data. So our students who have been historically marginalized and in communities where inclusive learning has not been the system, which is what was experienced by all of our students before Ruby Bridges opened. We were the first fully inclusive school to open in our district. So this is not a situation where our students came to us having been a part of a system like this. In fact, to connect to Cassie's slide related to LRE, we had a population of students who came to us who were all within that LRE 3 category and very much had very little access to general education core content, and rapidly the same exact students a year later are in that LRE 2 and 1 and really experiencing core instruction with their peers. The students didn't change, the practices did, the beliefs did, the mindset did. That's what needed to shift. Our students were ready to be doing the things and certainly shouldn't have had to be ready in certain ways in order to access what general education was. So what our team is doing and looking at this data set is really first and foremost trying to take that multifaceted view of our learners. So we know that the humanizing data is our most important part of our data set. So what are our goals for our students? What are our students' goals for themselves? What are the goals our families have for their students as we think about them learning and leading in this community of belonging? Then within that learning experience, we're looking at their educational outcomes across multiple data points. So what we know is that our students who are multilingual learners, our students who qualify for receiving special education services are showing a greater level of progress than what our district averages are, and in many respects, state averages are in terms of growth across the year. What we're also looking at more carefully when we're looking through this view is that we want to see that our progress lines are much steeper and moving forward and at a much greater pace for our students who are furthest from educational justice. They need to be making more progress, and we need to be providing them the opportunities and the access to instruction that's going to support that. I think, in close, what I would say about our learning data is that the story is really still being written. We're truly inspired by our students and their learning data because it's telling us that we're on the right track. And what it also is telling us, I think, and what our learners have been telling us when we take the opportunity to listen, is that this is the type of learning model that they need in order to thrive.
Thanks so much, Kathy. I feel like sometimes I could hear you talk about Ruby Bridges all day long, and I could spend all day, every day there. For all of our Washington State demonstration sites, they continue to be on a path of continuous growth, as Kathy has shared today. And as we're really focused on with our demonstration site schools and districts. So through the sharing of their kind of evolving story, their journey, and as they open their doors to others, demonstration sites continue to take that asset-based approach by highlighting what's working well and building upon that for sustainable inclusionary practices and systems. But as Kathy talks about, they don't shy away from, sharing about the messy middle, about, what's happening, their impetus for starting in the first place. And like Kathy said, there needs to be that place of starting. We need to begin this journey. We need to encourage one another to get started if not started already. So there are some kind of, we have, again, like 16 demonstration sites across our state, and some of their continuous growth plans include thinking more about equitable grading, expanding kind of co-teaching, or thinking about flexible services in a variety of ways. What it looks like to provide and write an inclusive IEP. Kathy talked a lot about this today as the foundation built upon everything else, those inclusive master schedules that really provide for the collaboration, that are designed for our students furthest away from educational justice. And we have some schools that are reimagining their course offerings to provide more general education opportunities based on what they've learned from special education. And this also includes some of the dismantling of segregated programs, students attending their neighborhood schools, students no longer removed from core instruction, students having a seat and receiving services in context of their general educational classrooms, and that increased time, effort, and efficacious procedures when collaborating. So coming together isn't enough. What's happening during those collaboration times? And, really creating that culture of belonging in our schools for each and every student. And this includes more of a statewide commitment to reframing inclusionary practices, to examine and focus on those inclusionary outcomes within an MTSS framework, to really consider how we're transforming and addressing the needs of students across the educational system, to make sure that when we're creating a community where we're looking beyond just where and what a student's learning, but really that they belong in all parts of their school. So all of us thinking about Ruby Bridges' mission of I'm a leader, I'm a learner, and I belong here. Thank you.
That's awesome. Would like to take a couple more minutes to follow up with any other questions that anyone might have had. I have a quick question. So what does parent and family involvement look like at a truly inclusive school?
Should I take that one?
That's a good one for you, Kathy.
I'll just share an example because we've been doing a lot of that work this year. Starting the school year is always a great opportunity to sort of forge new relationships, reacquaint, try to get a sense of where our students have been in their journeys over the summer. I think that truly when we're thinking about engaging with our students and families, particularly students who qualify for IEPs, in an example, a lot of this work is around building foundational trust and relationship. That partnership is so key and important. It at times has been about accepting responsibility for the injustices that have been invoked upon their children in their process of learning. And I think as a leader, that's really important. I take that responsibility of taking responsibility for being a part of a system that is unjust, and also making some bold statements and commitments to families about what it will look like for their students. I do think the other piece of the puzzle is really utilizing resources that people like Cassie have made, which is providing us the support to talk to families about the differences between what IEPs provide for students in their instructional experience in school and what core academic instruction and access to a free and appropriate public education can and should look like. So there's that partnership of sharing information, helping sort of reimagine what that goal setting and what outcomes can look like for students and families. And then really that recursive process of thinking about what types of communication work best for certain families and certain students and student need sets. I think our students who have the most significant needs, it requires us to be really creative and think about what families need in terms of support and communication so that there is a connection between school and home, particularly for students who are not able to expressively come home and share what their day looked like or what that processes looks like. The other piece, I think that powerful part of inclusion, which is being in a space is not the goal. Being there is not, that is the lowest level of inclusion. And so we really want to be then interrogating what's happening in that space and thinking that part through. The other piece I found in our journey is being really impacted by this idea that as a leader showing up without the answers and being really curious and intentionally curious with families about what their experiences are. This year, we're using a lot of resource from street data and Shane Saphir's work, as well as thinking about that idea of how do we engage families so that they can tell us what they are hoping schools will be like for their students and then adjust our purpose, right? I don't decide what belonging looks like for my students and families. They experience belonging and they tell us how we can cultivate that experience for them. So I think that that's that humility process, that curiosity process, and that understanding that relationship is everything. And so it's been exciting and it's been humbling and it's been interesting to see how that changes the nature of every single thing we do.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Kathy, I just wanted to kind of build on to what you were saying kind of quickly. Also, part of what we've been trying to do is thinking about how our families and communities are co-designing the process with us. So we're not just thinking about how do we do all of these things and then how do we do family engagement? How is family engagement occurring across all of the decisions that we're making? And then, but in addition to that, then how are we sustaining family engagement? So how are we building a system where that sustains? We're asking ourselves, questions that some may seem simple, but like, is the school eliciting feedback from families' preferred ways of two-way communication, like email, phone, really thinking about all those different ways, are all school activities, do they have interpreters? When we're scheduling meeting with family members and school community events, are the times reflective of diverse family schedules? So, really thinking about those and having that as part of the entire co-design process.
Great.
Thanks, Cassie and Kathy. And I also shared, and we think that Cassie earlier talked about the larger IPP cadre, and we put in the chat there, the Family Engagement Collaborative has a great resource, a family toolkit, and that you can check out and look at that too.
Thank you. So what would you say has been one of the biggest obstacles?
You know, what's interesting, you would think that COVID would have been a big obstacle, but it wasn't. In some ways, it allowed us to, you know, I think during COVID times, we've been using this word pivot a lot, right? It's allowed us to reimagine new ways of doing things. And so whereas I think that we could have used that even, I mean, Kathy didn't get to open her school in person until would have been last spring? When was it? Yeah. And so, I mean, really, or the spring before. So she opened a virtual school at first. So it kept coming back to, though, what is the mission of our school? So I think part of it is there's these obstacles, but part of it also is there's lots of questions about singular students. How are we changing how we're interacting with single students? And I think that what's been most transformational about Ruby Bridges is that they are putting systems in place despite of maybe a larger system not supporting them. And what are we learning from how Ruby Bridges is setting up the structured systems and supports in their school so we can scale it, so we can learn from it, so we can make it more systematized across our districts and systems. Did you want to add something, Kathy? I saw that mute button come off for a minute there.
I was just processing. I would just piggyback on what Cassie is saying in terms of, I think that belief barriers are always something that need to be interrogated. We at Ruby Bridges, with opening a school and really surfacing some of those expectations around at least being committed to interrogating beliefs and moving through those barriers was really important. But the other piece I would say is I feel that whether it's educational leaders or educational staff within buildings, oftentimes that pursuit of perfection and that deeply held belief in making an impact on the students that we serve is something that can both sort of bring the energy into the room and actually create a barrier for us, because if we are grounded in this idea that we need to be perfect and that our students are our students and not all of our students, oftentimes we're creating our own sets of barriers and walls toward progress. And so a lot of our conversations this year, going into this year, just that, you know, ultimately our work is not or work. It's not we're doing well or we're failing. We need to not only be able to recognize that the middle is messy, but that there's going to be moments in this journey where we will have a really wonderful idea and it won't go well today. And that doesn't mean that we abandon our principles or our beliefs or our vision. And so living in that and not letting perfection and this idea that each one of us is the individual savior as opposed to this collective sense of having will to impact students' lives, I think is super important. But it's also kind of that tension that exists for many of us in this field. Some of the very reasons we got into it can be the things that get in our way in terms of impacting, you know, overall outcomes for students.
What big opportunities do you foresee in the next year?
I put the link there, but we're hoping too that people can, you know, come out and visit. And I know many are far away, but yeah, come out and visit and engage in those transformational learning experience. That's what I hope, because that also, as Kathy was saying, it helps the demonstrations kind of grow as they share their story and share that reinforces practices and helps refine practices. So I think it's, you know, definitely a win both ways too. So that's one I think of in the next coming year.
Yeah, I would, again, I'll kind of reinforce what Rita Marie said. Please come visit us in Washington State. You're welcome. Come learn alongside us. We would love to have you here. Another thing that we're kind of, or another framework that we're reframing some of our work in Washington State to really think about and I touched on this briefly, but inclusionary practices within an MTSS framework. So how are we really engaging all parts of our system to support this work? So those are kind of some of the next steps that we're thinking about, is really thinking about, we can't just think about how we're changing the ways that we're delivering special education services. How are we creating an infrastructure where all students belong at all levels of the system? So coming out of Washington State, you're going to hear us talking about this a lot, and reframing our work to really look at what inclusive outcomes look like within an MTSS framework.
Lynn from Kentucky Department of Education asks, is this just a school-based, or are there any businesses or community organizations sharing in this collaborative inclusion practice?
That's a great question, Lynn. We do have community-based organizations that are supporting our practices. They're actually part of the IPP cadre. For example, we have Open Doors for Multicultural Families that's a partner in our work. We also have Roots for Inclusion, in addition to PAVE in Washington State. So we have a lot of different community organizations. We know that that's an important piece in thinking about how we engage the larger community in building a greater kind of inclusive network. So, and that was intentional to involve community organizations in this work. And as part of the demonstration sites project, one of the things that I did was every time I went to visit a region, I met with community-based organizations and did kind of somewhat of like a needs assessment, just asking questions about where they saw the greatest level of needs, where they saw the greatest strengths, and was able to engage with communities and families around inclusive education in their region.
Thank you so much. I suppose with that, I'm going to go ahead and here we have contact information for our presenters today. And this slideshow will be sent out to everybody on the line. And finally, thank you for joining us, everyone. If you have any questions about the Webisode series, feel free to reach out to me, crystal.eldridge@ccsso.org. Like I said, I'll be sending out the link to the recording of this presentation, as well as a copy of the presentation. And please join us for our upcoming webisodes. We won't be having a webisode in October, but our next webisode in November will be on using ESSER relief funds to support transition services for students with disabilities. And we'll talk to representatives from INTAC-C, the Minnesota Department of Education, and the Nevada Department of Education. And if you are still on the line, if you could take a few moments to go ahead and just answer some questions on this poll for me, that would be fantastic. And I will stop the recording here.